better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life.
Rob, this is Dungeon Master of None.
That's right. And wow, that was a very, very powerful start. You caught me off guard.
Right.
I'm Rob. Sorry.
You can't. It's all downhill from here because it's a mailbag episode of Dungeon Master of None.
That's right. Matt's wearing a really cool shirt. I got distracted by it. I hadn't noticed what it's a Fear and Loathing shirt. It's got bats on it, the big sunglasses. Anyway, I'm bringing my best self, my A game, to this mailbag episode.
B game.
But that's okay. That's the promise that we deliver to you every week, is that we will give you a C+ effort at least every single week. But here we are, providing you with insights and answers. And many of you have written in, emailed, texted, DM'd with questions that we hope to be able to answer.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to do our best to give you some Dungeon Master advice for your game. Hopefully it will be universal enough that everyone listening can have some kind of, take something fun away from it. So Rob, let's get started.
Let's do it.
Here's our first letter, and this one's from Caleb. Hey, Matt and Rob. Rob and Matt sound strange. Sorry, Rob.
That's
Big
okay.
fan of the show. Oh, sick Rob bird. A big fan of the show. Thanks for the hours of entertainment and great DM advice. How do you distribute treasure, magic items, spell scrolls for the wizard, and loot in general for your games? Reading through the DM's guide, I was shocked to see how much treasure players are expected to receive as they play through the game. What are players supposed to do with all that gold? How do you distribute magic items to players? I enjoy random treasure tables, but my players also like magic item shops. So, scattershot questions. Here's a summary. How do you award treasure and gold? How much treasure and gold do you award to your players? How do you give players gold? What can they do with it? And what's your opinion on rolling up random loot in a dungeon and on buying it from a shop? Thanks so much, Caleb.
Good questions, all Caleb. So, as
you've asked every treasure and gold question conceivable.
So, we did an episode not too long ago on gold and treasure in general. And it's episode, I forget, but...
Thanks, Rob.
You know what? Fuck you, Matt. I'll look it up right now.
No, so yeah, we talked at length on like what to do with your gold, especially if you can't spend it on magic items. But, there's some useful tools out there already for like spending money on magic items. There's a document that if you Google Sane magic item prices, we'll give you some 5th edition magic item prices. But back to the first questions, I think is where we should start.
It is episode 186, All That Glitters. So,
All That Glitters. Yeah,
there's
not a great title for looking it up.
We link to Sane magic item prices, and there's some good loot tables and resources in Kingdoms and Warfare. I recommend that you check that out. But to answer your question sort of all at once, it's that the magic item and gold economy in 5th edition especially is pretty borked. It doesn't work very well, and if you're looking at it and you think to yourself, this looks confusing and bad, you're probably right. That being said, in terms of practical advice, I suppose, I tend to give my players more gold and magic items than they will use, because they forget about them and then don't use them. So I'm pretty generous with scrolls, potions, magic items. I don't give a lot of, like, magic weapons, especially not, like, legendary ones. I really like to give neat, even powerful utility items, like swan boats or bags of magic
portable
beans, holes. Yeah. I always give a handy haversack or a bag of holding as soon as possible. This is my, I guess, hack, because if your players are paying attention, then they will spend a lot of time on loot and loot management. And if they're not paying attention, then they'll just ignore everything that you give them. So I tend to give a bunch of things that they will be happy to have, but aren't going to impact the power level of the campaign very much. The other thing that you can do is you can just constantly remind them, or make one of your players responsible for gold and items, and if somebody likes that, then that's great. I have found that even if you follow the DM's guide outline, it's not gonna break the game. But
no,
players...
in fact, you're kind of assumed that at high levels, like a fighter will have a magic weapon, for example.
Yeah. More common in my experience is that players will run out of things to spend their gold on. So that gets, I guess, to your question about magic item shops or rolling loot in a dungeon. I love random loot tables, and it's always more fun to tell players that they get an ivory statuette of Myrkul and 17 flawed sapphires instead of saying, I don't know, you get 2,000 gold pieces. So that's what I like about random loot generators, and it also usually does a good job of coming up with scrolls and potions that, you know, I don't want to have to dig through the loot list for.
I haven't I haven't done this in a while, but I used to like say, okay, this is what you find here, plus one minor wondrous item, and then I would roll in front of my players just for the drama of it.
I love that.
They seem to like that. Yeah. So it can be fun, especially if you like forefront, like this was randomly placed here just because they kind of get excited for the rolling too.
Yeah.
I mean, what's like the general rule of thumb? Like I say, like, okay, there should be some loot at least once per session by like level 3 or maybe 5. Like everyone should have at least one useful magic item for their character. Like,
yeah,
like, oh, if you're a fighter, a +1 shield. If you're a wizard, you should have found someone else's spell book or something like that.
Yeah. As for shops, I actually like shops. I just make sure that you give your vendors personality, give the shops some flair or flavor. That way they're not just like I look for the potion seller, I look for the magic item merchant. I love Waterdeep Dragon Heist for this because immediately it introduces your players to about half a dozen shops in their, local area where everybody sells ultimately everything that you might need, and all of the vendors are different and have their own things going on. So I don't, it depends on the area. If they wander into, a random hamlet somewhere, there isn't going to be a magic item vendor necessarily. But if they're in a city or a hub, you can have planned ahead, these are your various magic item vendors. And that way it doesn't feel so goofy, I guess. Yeah. It's not like your players are like, I go to the scroll merchant, I think right. It just giving them a little bit of personality, a little bit of flavor makes it feel less gamey.
One of the questions was, how do you award treasure to your players? I think it's very important to think about the characters you have. Like, I mean, in personal experience, nothing can be more frustrating than, okay, we've been adventuring for 5 levels. There's been tons of magic loot. They all require attunement by a spellcaster. I'm a rogue. I can't use any of this or something like that. Or like I'm a fighter. I can't use any of this. I've also had the opposite happen. It's like the only thing that has been dropped so far is magic weapons and armor. I'm a wizard. Like, think about your players and, okay, they may distribute it differently than you had planned, but if you put in an item that would be useful for every player every couple sessions, people will be happy.
Yeah, to be clear, don't lean purely on random generation, because then you might end up with a horde full of magical swords and nothing for your wizard, or vice versa. So I always put my thumb on the scale just a little bit to make sure that everybody gets something cool, but, over time, usually everybody ends up with something that they want. Again, you should just give more rather than less. Your players are... It's a lot harder to become overpowered with magic items in 5th edition.
Yeah.
Attunement,
slots, limit all of this,
This is where the Sane magic item prices list comes in handy. Things like Instant Fortress are hugely annoying and disruptive, even though they're technically not very expensive or not very rare. But outside of a few exceptions like that, generally everything you give your players is not going to derail your campaign.
I think a lot of people's first reaction to the DMG list is like, whoa, that's a lot of magic items. I usually give one every 4 sessions or something like that. And the thing is, Dungeons and Dragons is a game of of like crazy fantasy. And if you don't give a lot of magic items, this is where I think a lot of the complaints about characters who are not spellcasters feeling boring at high levels come in, right? You feel a lot less boring if your champion fighter has like a flaming longsword and winged boots and stuff like that. Like, yeah, your high level characters should have cool magic items.
In terms of specifics, Caleb, I know that wasn't terribly helpful, but that's because it's hard to be specific. You've identified a very common complaint and confusion. So hopefully this was generally useful and you can take it to your campaign. If your players like magic item shops, give them magic item shops. Just make sure that they have personalities and shopkeepers who are real people and will respond to that. I don't hate a shopping session as long as it's on the shorter side. Players tend to love it. So,
all right, thanks for the letter, Caleb.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Peter. Starting with the obligatory, I love your show, long-time listener, first-time contactor, and all that jazz. I recently listened to episode 224 with Sally Tamarkin, and I was floored by the wealth of knowledge Sally contributed, particularly with the experience as a sensitivity reader. Since I don't have the budget to hire a sensitivity reader for my home game, I was hoping you could fill that role in an upcoming campaign. We'll do our best. The setup. I am stealing an idea Keith Baker suggested on his podcast, Manifest Zone. It takes place in the Kubara region of Eberron, a pseudo-Wild West with magic, where players will loot tombs for the magical equivalent of oil, i.e. dragon shards, while unwittingly causing the magical equivalent of global warming, i.e. releasing demon overlords. This is, I like this unsubtle metaphor. I dig it. It's all an incredibly ham-fisted way to explore the concept of greed, and I expect the players will lose interest to raise cattle or something. I'm glad you're prepared, because my players would also probably get distracted and start raising livestock or settling down.
We can have our own ranch. I'll have a breed of horses and name them all. That's fine. Just have dinosaurs attack every once in a while. That's right.
Along the way, I'm concerned about how to represent the Eberron depiction of lizard folk without stumbling into various harmful tropes. Eberron does a good job giving them some hidden depth, but I'm worried that they jump out of the jungle hissing at the party in an incomprehensible language. The party will be too busy cringing to notice that. Or worse, the party will gleefully slaughter the inhuman monsters and be overcome with guilt and or feel forced into doing a genocide after the fact. Are there any harmful tropes I should make sure to avoid, or better yet, a resource you can recommend that shows me harmful tropes in advance and how to avoid them? How might you approach a culture like lizard folk in a game? Thanks a lot for all the help over the years, and keep rolling them dice, Peter.
Okay, Peter. So you're absolutely right. Like, there's a potential for some harmful tropes here. You're also like explicitly doing a campaign that is in some ways drawing on themes of the Western United States, especially like the mini gold rushes that happened, or silver rushes in the US, but with magic things instead of just pure gold. I think I would start with like specifically 4th edition, actually, because and you don't actually have to like buy a 4th edition book, but 4th edition turns the lizard folk of Kubara into like a multi-species, many different faction civilization with not just lizard folk, but dragonborn, lizard folk, kobolds, troglodytes, right? And they're in many, many different clans. So like make lots of specific clans that aren't just like one species. I think that's a quick and easy start that will help you.
You also, I mean, I think you're also already doing a good job in that you're thinking about this. You've correctly identified a potential problem, which is where in your pseudo Wild West campaign, you don't want the antagonist lizard folk to appear like merciless, stereotypical savages. You don't want them to be like, Native Americans from, a 60s Western or whatever. But as long as you don't, I mean, what Matt described is a great suggestion, but just be conscientious in your descriptions. Don't put your lizard folk in headdresses. Don't have them wear, don't have them paint themselves with Aztec style markings. Like, give them some, separate them from the sort of harmful tropes that you would expect to see in a more colonialist, more Wild West type campaign that wasn't concerned about that, and give them some depth of character. If you're worried about your players,
have lots of individual like named NPCs.
Yes.
Like have them meet some lizard folk who live in Dragonborn or whatever, who live in town, some who live in fortified cities, some who don't. And then make sure there are lots of different factions, right? Because some lizard folk groups, right, are cultists of the overlords / global warming
Right.
and want it to happen, and others are the sworn defenders of like keeping that from happening, and then probably others are neutral in the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, don't have your first encounter with them be them leaping out of the jungle and hissing at them. Have your players encounter them in a neutral situation and see them interacting with other people or trading or doing just ordinary stuff, so that they don't immediately associate them with horrible jungle dwelling
monsters.
Exactly. I mean, you've already approached this in a very thoughtful way, so I think you're going to be fine. But just avoid. You can have them still fill an interesting role and still be antagonists, or many of them, like Matt mentioned, some of them are cultists of the demon overlords, without having all lizard folk be an evil chaos race that need to be exterminated, genocided. And having the multiple lizard associated species be part of a confederation, troglodytes, dragonkin, that sort of thing. That's a great suggestion from Matt. That's a great way to give the impression of a confederation of united tribes and clans rather than just a horrible horde living in the jungle.
The way I see Kubara in Eberron is it's like, because of a bunch of historical events that we don't have to get into right now in Eberron, like Kubara is kind of like the rest of Eberron, where in the rest of Eberron you have humans, elves, dwarves, and halflings and goblins like living together in cities. In Kubara, it's these like reptilian species, and there's just as much like diversity within Kubara as there is in the rest of Eberron. And you want to like, I don't know, try and play to that, right? And easy steps, have lots of named NPCs among those people that the players meet. And the way I also read Keith Baker's blog on running his game like this, and I don't know, I think the thing I kind of like about this is I like the sort of dragon shard extraction metaphor that you've put out with the evil demons. But I think the way I would run it is like the lizard folk species, including like dragonborn and kobolds, have like been fighting their own like centuries long conflict over this. And the humanoid species that have entered this are just kind of stepping into that conflict. And both sides are trying to get these crazy prospectors kind of working for them. And I think that makes it kind of interesting and allows your players to navigate. Actually, maybe they do want to ally with the cultists so they can make profit. Or maybe they're like, oh, actually, we're going to ally with these like paladin lizard folks who are keeping the demon in. So I would set up as like this conflict has been going on and the humanoids are new. They're the new piece on the board. And that's setting a lot of things in motion.
Yeah. you have an opportunity here because Kubara is so interesting, and because lizard folk are non-humanoid, unique species, to really get weird and different with it. And that, I think, makes it easier than in other situations to avoid certain harmful tropes. So I think you're off to a good start. Thanks for writing, Peter.
Indians scattered on dawn's highway bleeding, ghosts crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind.
Aloha, Matthew, and Robert. My players often like to bring their problems to the local temple, church, city watch station, or whatever seems like the authority that's relevant to the problem. For example, Weird Street Peddler, who, unbeknownst to them, is a follower of Thara's Dune. I shouldn't have said that. Was selling bags of mystery items, each for 50 gold. Thinking, why not? They bought two. One turned out to be a bag of holding, and the other contained a shadow demon. Not wanting the latter bag, they decided to go to the Temple of Corellian to see if they would take it off their hands. The temple has a Ghostbusters-like containment unit. They spoke with the Archdruid, who essentially told them, no, this isn't our problem. Another thing they love to do is ask for additional help in the form of NPCs to help them with a potential upcoming fight from those aforementioned locations. I think most DMs can agree that they hate running extra NPCs that they didn't intend to turn up in the first place. My question and concern is, what is a way that I can deal with this? I find myself as playing NPCs as either being accommodating or just flat denying them, which makes me feel like I'm either way too nice or way too mean. But of course, I want them to interact with the world and its NPCs, just not try to pass on problems to them. Love the show, mahalo. That's Hawaiian for thanks. Arash.
This is a great question, and I have two answers. I have one, which is what I would do, and it's not very nice. And then I have a second answer, which is a little bit nicer. So
hit us with the mean answer, Rob.
My players have done something like this before, and the way that I discourage this is in one of two ways. Is that I have the NPCs, as real-life authorities often are, be varying degrees of corrupt. And they will offer to help and either fleece the players, betray them, or just fail to show up when they are supposed to arrive. This serves the function of educating the players on why they should not trust authority.
Yeah. Have them do this. Have them hire some people or get some people to help them once, and then just have them no call, no show once.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Then they're fucked.
Have them go to the priest of whatever, and he says, yes, of course, for a nominal fee, I will take care of the shadow demon. And then the shadow demon is just running around the city because the priest just took the money and tossed the bag into the alley. Like, this is, if they go to the city watch asking for help, the watch commander says, yeah, whatever, we'll take care of this. And then, takes their money, writes it down in his report, and then does nothing. I just, this is how I discourage this sort of behavior. This is not very, this is kind of like falls into the denying players category. So this can be a little like less helpful. But I again, when I'm DMing, I try to create, I try to, the world responds in a way that I believe to be logical, or I try to. So if the players are constantly going to authorities for help, they're going to get slapped, because if the authorities could deal with it on their own, they would have. That's why that's why
the problem exists in the first place.
That's right. That's why adventurers exist, and so that's my first answer. The second is that you should emphasize, this is a little bit more gentler, and this still falls into denying, but your NPCs are consistently going to be less powerful than the PCs. And so, again, you can have a city watchman or a priest or somebody come with them and get murdered because they're a level 1, commoner or whatever. Or you could have them say, well, I would love to help, but I don't think that I can handle a shadow demon or a worshiper of Tharizdun or any number of these threats. I'm just, we need your help. You're powerful adventurers.
Yeah, I mean, like, one great way to illustrate that is the next time the players, like, hire some hirelings to fight these high-level demons or whatever, they're all, 8 hit point guards who can barely wield a spear, and you can have some dramatic, that guy got beheaded by a demon, the other ones run away, and the players are like, oh, man, we got this little guy killed. Oh.
Right. You can choose how unpleasant you want this to be. If your players really like those NPCs, you may not want to kill them. But I think I would illustrate this by having the players get, slapped a bit for going to NPCs. And then if they don't pick up on it, you can try to be a little bit more explicit.
Yeah, I mean, there is, it does suck because it's like the horror movie trope of like, well, why don't they just call the fire department or, the feds or something? And
right.
And then, it's like, well, okay, no one will listen to them or something like that. But of course, that is not the most interesting way to tell a story. And Rob's point is the one I would emphasize, which is player characters are unique and powerful. Your wizard is more powerful than most other arcane spellcasters, right? Your cleric is more powerful than any of the priests at the local temple. He is unique, or she is uniquely blessed, right? Your rogue is better than an average thief. And like, yeah, like the reason the players are the locus of action centers on them is like they are cool and unique. They are a cut above the average person in your world, or most people. So, like, let them deal with the problems. Other people just can't handle it.
This is something we've talked about before. If they're in a Forgotten Realms type setting where there are high-level adventurers, sometimes the question comes up, well, why don't you deal with this Kelvin Blackstaff or just Jordan? But they're busy. If there's a level 20 Archdruid running the local temple, assume that they're very busy doing something besides dealing with low-level thugs, and that's beneath them. You wouldn't ask maybe you would, I don't know, you wouldn't ask the Pope to do an exorcism, right? He's got people to do that for him. He's busy.
That sounds like one of those questions in the the text crawl of a trailer. You wouldn't ask the Pope to do an exorcism, or would you? Battle Pope coming Christmas 2020.
I think that, if you're trying to maintain verisimilitude, the sort of assumed way that fantasy adventuring worlds work is that adventurers exist because there are problems that the authorities cannot deal with. For whatever reason, they're busy, they're not powerful enough, they don't care. All of these are valid questions. It's not quite, or objections. This is not quite like a horror movie where the cops just are like, I don't want to. It's valid. I think they make sense. You just have to sort of present that to your players so that they know not to go to the City Watch every time that something bad happens.
Another way that, like, just to make your life easier to deal with this problem is send them on a mini arc out into a distant location, a wilderness, an extraplanar travel, depending on their level. Just get them away from lots of NPCs for 2 or 3 sessions, and remind them, hey, the burden of action is on you, and they'll kind of get trained to play that way. And then when they come back, they'll be like, all right, we're the ones doing things here.
This is actually great advice. This might even be a better thing to start with, because if you send them on a small dungeon, one that's 3-4 sessions, they'll get used to having to initiate action and handle things on their own and figure things out. And then when they come back, presumably they won't be seeking out authority figures to help with their problems. I might start with that. That way you don't have to do any complicated or unpleasant NPC bashing.
Yeah.
Good question, though, Rash. I've encountered this before, and that's my approach. You have a couple of options, though. Your players will learn.
I think
they'll pick up on it.
They will.
Just keep at it.
Especially as they get more powerful. They will want... I doubt this is your problem, but sometimes I have seen this where dungeon masters keep players at too low of a level for too long. And eventually you're going to get to level 10 and realize that you can do a lot of things. Like,
yeah.
You are really a cut above the average person.
Thank you, Rush.
On the Sane that burn crosses. Some of those that work forces are the Sane that burn crosses. Some of those that work forces are the Sane that burn crosses. Some of those that work forces are the Sane that burn crosses. Killing in the name of.
Our next letter comes from Nick. Nick writes, "Hello, gentlemen. Long-time listener, first-time mailer. I've really enjoyed your podcast for almost 2 years, I guess. Started listening at the start of the plague. God, it's been a long plague. It sure has. I've run a few games in the past, and nothing really has happened, but I have just started running a new game, and the players and I are all really excited about it. Long story short, instead of D&D 5e, our usual system, I have decided to go buck wild and try to run a game in the GURPS system. As far as I recall, I don't think you all have done an episode about GURPS, and I was wondering if either of you had played in a GURPS game, or run one for that matter, and had any advice for first-time GURPS GMs. I picked GURPS. This is the most times I've said GURPS out loud in my entire life. I'm enjoying it a lot. I picked GURPS because I wanted a campaign set in the real world, and GURPS seemed like it'd be a good fit for that. The main storyline is that the material plane and the magic plane have collided, and how that would affect the world. I'm planning for the main antagonist to be either Elon Musk or someone of his ilk who caused the planes to collide for stonks reasons. I like it. I'm thinking that I could spin the billionaire space race off as a explanation of how this is researched, because that seems like a fun way to make that make sense to a non-billionaire. My second question would be, do y'all have any fun ideas for how magic would interrupt the status quo of our current world? Obviously, capitalists gonna capitalist, but any zany fun outcomes that y'all have would be really awesome to hear. Love your work. It's very enjoyable to listen to your discussions on my horrendous commutes to and from work. Keep rolling them dice, Nick.
Oh, okay. So some zany ideas.
Good question
For magic planes interconnecting. I would start with the idea.
Sorry,
and you've probably already thought of this.
Let's start with the first question, Matt. And just for
what was
anyone
the
who's
first
not
question?
familiar, GURPS stands for the Generic Universal Role-Playing System.
Yes.
And it is it's like Savage Worlds in that it's a general framework. It doesn't come with a setting attached, right? It is something that you're supposed to be able to adapt. And God, it's been around forever. It's been around since the 80s. Matt, what do we think about GURPS?
I don't have anything useful to say about GURPS because I haven't ever played GURPS. I know it is a very, I think as you just said, simulationist game. It is got detailed rules, but they're all pretty straightforward. I believe doesn't it use the percentile system?
I believe it does. I have played GURPS. I've never run GURPS, and it's simplified, it's simulationist, it has percentage and all kinds of things. As far as I can tell, it works well for a modern game. It has good rules for that, good rules for guns and cover and things like that. So I think, Nick, you're on the right track. GURPS is cool because, like all RPGs that have been around for 40 years, it has a lot of resources, so you should be able to find something to put your game together. But yeah, like Matt, I don't have a lot to add to this. If it were me, just because what I'm more familiar with, if I were trying to run something outside of 5e in a modern setting, or a mixed magic modern setting, I would run it in Savage Worlds because it's simpler and I know how that works. But it has the sort of the same use case as GURPS, so go for it.
Again, I have not played GURPS or run GURPS or read any GURPS books in a long time, so I have no useful advice. But on the second question, I have some ideas. I would start with a big framework of there's the zone, but in this case, there are a million zones, right, across the world. And there's absolutely bonkers ones, right? So basically, even in some cities, some are small, some are 100 feet across, some are 100 miles across, right? Parts of the material plane have been corrupted by specific themes of the magical plane. And then you can have just a little web of zones that your players can go to. And I love that idea. So that's how I would frame it.
I think you're also right that capitalists are gonna capitalist. There's about a gajillion directions that you can go with this. A very simple one, if you don't want to get deep into world building or trying to map out, systems, is, what is the world always needs energy. So magic or something magic related is a powerful energy source. And so Elon Musk or his billionaire counterparts, whatever, has discovered a magical source, or how to harness just straight up magical energy to create power. And this has made him or his peers fabulously wealthy, started a new gold rush, space race type industrial revolution. That's an easy, simple one. You can also have things like, if we did have magic, what I think about this all the time with regards to a medieval setting, but if people could just create food and water, or mending, or whatever, like, how would that change the economy? And you can get as weird as you want with that. You can have, maybe this Elon Musk guy has a whole warehouses full of wizards that can cast fabricate, and he is fabulously wealthy because he's just got a factory line of wizards churning out fabricated objects of any shape or model. There's all sorts of places that you could go with this. I think that the idea of a space race or a gold rush is a good idea.
I would just stick with the space race is planar travel, and you've basically made your material plane into, in my opinion, like a planescape campaign, where like the zones of magical intersection, where the magic plane intersected with the material plane, are just from a little different, where let's say your capitalists are mining it for extra magical energy, to just out of control crazy. Here's the list I came up with. You have a zone that is filled with all the creatures wizards normally summon. You have a zone where every single object, plant, tree, and creature are awakened and like covered with eyes and will talk to you. So, this part of the city, every chair is alive and stuff like that. It's a very dangerous place to enter. You have a zone where like gravity is reversed, so as the players travel there, they start getting lighter and they have to figure out a way to make it across this zone. You have a zone where every person and creature was turned immortal and they all now fight each other, like in Acheron in the other planes. You have a zone where there are like kaiju and giant beasts. You have a zone where everyone's now undead or ghosts or like spirits, like from the Ethereum. Just, I would say, mine all the crazy planes from like Planescape, and then imagine if one of those like defining traits of those planes took over a chunk of your material plane. Players are charged with like mapping things, or they're the only ones who can go into these dangerous places and get things for other people, or possibly stop Elon Musk or whatever.
The other thing to consider is that, what's the other thing that billionaires are always trying to gain control over, and that's labor, right? And magical, there are many magical solutions to that, ranging from unseen servant to unintelligent undead to constructs. And so maybe it's as simple as keep all of Matt's ideas, but in addition to this, you can have sort of the Elon Musks or the billionaires are getting fabulously wealthy by having a workforce entirely made up of intelligent zombies, or of Modrons, right? And you can get real sinister with this.
Yeah, Elon Musk has stolen the supreme contract from the area where the Modron planes, and so all the Modrons serve him. If you can get that contract back from him, they will stop immediately.
And if you want to get real sinister with this, if it's a Planescape campaign, then maybe they discovered a plane of dubious, questionably sentient creatures that they've somehow enslaved into working for them. And, they get away with this because they are, it's real nerdy about like law, but like, Earth laws don't apply to whatever this new plane is, so they can just do slavery and no one can stop them. And I would enjoy sort of like legal machinations around horrible capitalists enslaving extraplanar creatures, but that may be more weird and nerdy than you want to get. But that is also a direction that you could go if you were also trying to make them really evil and inspire your players to just fuck their shit up, Shinra style.
Yeah, maybe Elon Musk or one of the space capitalists or planar capitalists, planar race capitalists have enslaved all of the angels that crash landed into the material plane. And so you have armies of solars and stuff working for them, and then opposing them is another set of planar creatures. The players have to navigate the two. That could be a lot of fun. Yeah, there's so many fun ideas from this.
Okay, great questions, Nick. Thanks for writing.
Yeah, thanks, and good luck on your GURPS, Nick. Here is our next letter, and this one's from Jim. Hey, DMs. There's 2 questions. First question, I recently snagged a copy of the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide and discovered I adore the art inside. It's worth a spot on my shelf just for that. What legacy books do you love for their art and find worthy to be in a collection? Question the second, I always stash a level-appropriate random encounter in my back pocket I can throw at my PCs in case they curveball me and I don't know what to do next. What other quick and easy things do you recommend keeping in the quiver, 5-room dungeons, etc.? Thanks, Jim.
This is a great question. Unfortunately, the answer is one that you've already found. I really like the art in a lot of the 4th edition books. There's some really unique things there, and whenever I find one, I only have a couple on my shelf, but especially because they had such a limited shelf life, it's more likely that I haven't seen it. So 4th edition is a good one to start with, to be honest.
I think the 4th edition art is really cool. It's also interesting in that it's, I don't know if you agree with me, Rob, but like such a different style than is in all of the editions before and after. Like, one, it's a more unified style. Like, all of the dwarves have the same like cultural like stylings on their like clothing and stuff like that, and the same is true for all the elves. And I feel like the player characters depicted in the 4th edition art all look like a little more powerful. Like their feet are very much like lifting off the ground, and like they look like more epic heroes. Mm-hmm. Other editions, people look like kind of weird junkers that are, more murder hobo-like,
Yeah, that's a great point, Matt. And that's like one of the things that I like about it is that it's a distinct art style. I don't know that I like it better, but I really do like that it's different. It gives me ideas. Yeah.
It's so funny that like 4th edition is complained or praised for being so different than the other editions. I think the same is true of its art, right? It's got kind of it's completely set apart for the most part from the other line of D&D stuff.
What are some other, this is a good question though, because
I love the Planescape books.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the artist, but they're all done by this one iconic artist. They're all very cool. They all have a like very Jim Henson feel. So
this is I'm gonna admit to something problematic, but like I also really I love the Dark Sun art from the like all of the Dark Sun books, because it's such like sword and sorcery, Conan, Barsoom stuff, and not that that's like super rare, but like it's got like such a fun like pulp feel. Like they really like leaned on the stuff from like those magazines from the 30s and 40s, and I think that's so cool. A lot of it is like chainmail bikini shit, and it's sometimes like explicitly misogynistic, so that's not great. But like I don't know, it's got a like real heavy metal feel, So those are just fun for me for like pulling images out of or getting inspiration. I do want to admit that those are not one, it's not always great art, and two, the subject matter is not terrific, but I think it's such a unique style that I really like to, every time I come across a Dark Sun book, I like to poke through it.
Yeah. I guess we all agree, all three of us, that we like books where there is like the style person in charge was like, all right, everyone's going to draw in the same style. It all has a really strong theme. Next question, what's in your back pocket? Rob, for me, it's basically not just one NPC or one challenge creation, but like just lots of names. Actually, I bought a book that I really, really love just this week. Let me see. Let me get the official name. 100 People in a Fantasy Tavern. And this is by friend of the podcast, Olivia Hill and Philomena Young and Machine Age Productions. It's basically a list of NPC names, portraits, goals, and like traits. So I just always need more NPCs that feel like real living, breathing people. So having 5 or 6 of those in my pocket at all times is so important for me.
I usually have a less sophisticated list like Matt does, but I love building encounters, and D&D Beyond has a neat little encounter builder tool now that allows you to sort of like put together a bunch of monsters and NPCs and roughly calculate sort of things. And I sometimes, just for fun, I will build a bunch of those, and I tend to keep a few different versions of those on hand in case the players wander into a situation where I want to throw my carefully curated goblin, shaman, and mooks encounter, or my bandit attack ambush in the alley encounter, or they've stumbled upon a bulette and some other monsters in a field. Like I have a few of these that I very rarely roll these out randomly, but sometimes my players will get themselves into a situation where I'm like, oh good, I can try out one of these encounters. So I always have a few of those on hand in case things get, in case I need to buy time, or if it's appropriate. But I always have some of those in my back pocket.
I mean, I also try and take the approach of I keep everything from the campaign in my back pocket. So everything that has been unused so far, that was skipped over or ignored, just sits there in my back pocket.
That's a good, I usually have NPCs or encounters or items or all three that I never had a chance to get to. And if I'm lucky, the players will give me an opportunity to use them later.
Thank you so much for the questions, Jim. Hope that helps.
All right. Our next one comes from Jesse. Jesse writes, "Hi, Matt and Rob. In episode 175, you accused J.K. Rowling of horrible world building for things like wizarding population inconsistencies, etc. I don't remember exactly what we said, but I stand by it. There's lots of dumb things about J.K. Rowling's world building, but let's get to the question. I'm not a Harry Potter superfan. Never read the books, never will, but I'm going to point out that decades after release, hundreds of millions of people know what their wizarding house is. You know what your wizarding house is. Real-life human children of OG fans know what their house is. This seems like a QED slam dunk on the assertion that Harry Potter has strong world building. The mailbag question then seems to be, what is more important in good world building, immersion or consistency? I'd argue that immersion is primary, and you've let yourself replicate the grognard abuses that menaced your formative years. Long-time listener, enjoy your thoughtful approach. This is a time where maybe your analytical bent has got you seeing all forest, no ents. Jesse." Jesse, I have to admit that you have hoisted us by our own petard. I think that that you're right, and that we are grognards, and we don't write in the newspaper that we're owned, because we are owned. I think you're
please
mostly
stop telling
right.
Everyone we're owned. It's
I think you're mostly right. I do want to say a couple things, but this is a very good point.
Yeah, the overall point, immersion does trump consistency, is so true. Like, your players are going to remember the cool faction, the cool name, over whether like all of the turnips can get to water deep on time or whatever,
right.
you know.
Right. Nobody's going to nobody's going to, like me, look at Quidditch and say, this game is dumb. All that matters is who catches the snitch. They're going to be like, wow, it's on brooms. That's cool.
We're gonna start playing Quidditch at our college in the world's. Sorry, people who play Quidditch, but like there are so many other sports. Like
there are cooler sports. But this is exactly the point. This is exactly the point. There are more people who play Quidditch on college campuses than people who like Matt and I. And I own that. So here's my objection. Is that I think that the fact that so many people know what their wizarding house is an indictment of us as a society, rather than an indication that it's good world building. But that being said, I think that this is a really, really good point that a lot of DMs can learn from. And that's that immersion is primary, right? If it feels real and fun and engaging and your players get excited about it, it does not matter if it makes sense. And I hate that that's the truth sometimes. And I think that it works better if, things make sense, but they don't have to. That's not a primary consideration.
Right.
I read an interesting literary article about world building recently that was pointing out that the purpose of world building is not to know how your goblins get their underwear laundered. It's to create a world in which you can tell your story, right? And even if a lot of that stuff is surface level, we all engage in world building and storytelling, right? Like even if you're writing a literary fiction novel that takes place in your hometown, you have done world building for your fictional characters to know, where they come from, what their backstory is, etc. But yeah, it is true that people like Matt and I are prone to falling victim to grognardism and focusing on whether or not something is logical or makes sense over whether or not it's fun and immersive and players can engage with it.
Yeah.
Or readers in this case.
Absolutely. I guess it's the rule of cool applies to world building just as much as, small interactions at your table. I think your point that immersion trumps consistency is true. I would say that for role-playing games, however, immersion trumps consistency has more caveats than, let's say, for a novel or a movie.
Right.
Just because in a role-playing game, players are constantly poking at things, pushing at things, messing with things in a way that a story that's been written by one or just a couple authors is not. So,
right. J.K. Rowling can control the narrative so that you never have to wonder how wizards took a shit until she decides to elucidate that in an interview later. Like right. that's a thing that you never have to really think about.
What an awful person. Anyway, it's like in a movie, right? You can have players hide from someone who could obviously see them, and then the camera, because they're not in the shot of the camera,
yes.
Right? And in role-playing games, there's too much freedom for that. So right. I would say, again, you are right. We are owned, but you just have to be aware, sometimes you will need some consistency. But the cool thing about like a fantasy game like Dungeons and Dragons or a high sci-fi game is you have so many, here's a magic thing that explains whatever the players actually got interested in, that you don't have to worry about it too much.
Right. But yeah, this is a good point. And this is advice that we do give. Like, really do not get, unless you love doing it, do not let yourself, when you are world building or game designing or thinking about your world, get bogged down in the details too much, because it isn't as important as whether or not the world is immersive, and your players may never come across it. But Matt makes a good point that this does in role-playing games, it's a little different because your players will be able to poke at the edges of the world a little bit easier than in a movie or in a novel. But I still think it's correct to lean on the rule of cool and to remember that it's okay if everything doesn't make sense or isn't entirely consistent. It just has to stand up to surface level scrutiny, basically.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think the one way you can save part of our approach is your search for an analytical approach or your search for consistency is just one like framework you can give yourself to make immersive things, to make cool shit. If you're asking a question like, you know, how do the turnips get to Waterdeep? You know, is there like a set of portals that go through the plane of water that they send boats down? And is that cool? Will that lead to cool exploration and adventures? I don't know, maybe. But yeah, you're right. Look for immersion over consistency. But keep in mind that unlike on a movie, sometimes the players knock down the sets and then all of a sudden they're backstage. You know, as long as you can turn that into something cool, then it's fine. It's fine that's inconsistent.
Okay, Jesse, thank you very much for writing in. You have owned us. Respect. I appreciate the challenge. Yeah, extremely good point here. Genuinely, thank you.
The other thing is sometimes it's okay to do both. You could have consistent populations, but the thing is, some people have strengths in other things.
Well,
and I'm still pissed about the population. Anyway, fuck J.K. Rowling. It's just like, I'm sorry.
The name of her Japanese wizarding school is just like she plugged in like wizard into Google Translate and was like, I don't know.
Now that I've been reminded about, I haven't thought about her in a while. Now I'm reminded about her. I'm just like so fucking mad at like, what a all-time piece of shit, you know? like people are really fucking suffering in at least this country and in a lot of places around the world, especially in her own stupid fucking island of Britain. And she's just like, I'm going to use my infinite influence and billions of dollars to just like fucking harass and make life miserable for trans kids and trans people, and just fucking like there's like a million people like her and they all fucking suck. It makes me so fucking mad. Anyway, like what the fuck, people? Come on, like have some fucking empathy. God damn it.
The only wizarding school in South America is Castelo Bruxo, which is, I'm pretty sure that's just like Castle of Witches in Portuguese. Like I just like, you know, the most like, again, it's not probably what it is. I don't speak Portuguese, but I'm guessing that if I were just going to like take 30 seconds to come up with the name of a wizarding school in Brazil and use Google Translate, this is probably what I would come up with. Anyway, this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter.
What a lazy piece of shit.
Because people love Harry Potter and they love the wizarding schools and they got into it before they knew what a piece of shit that J.K. Rowling was. And she has, like Matt said, betrayed that trust by, she could just shut up. You know, she could just not have said anything. She could just take her billions of dollars and disappeared and not been a massive piece of shit to trans people for absolutely no reason. Anyway, that's none of this has to do with the letter writer whatsoever. I'm just mad again about J.K. Rowling. Moving on.
When out of the blue, Snake appears at their table. Nice work on the troll thing, she says, eyes shifting. I wish you luck today in the cribbage match. Harry responds with, I wish you luck on not hating your parents for mixing up such an unthinkable person. She hobbles off. Harry notices the limp and tells his friends that he suspects Snake let in that troll last night as a diversion so that she could get whatever that three-headed dog is guarding. Whatever it is that Snake wants is probably the thing that Hagar got from the vault.
One thing I want to say is we got a lot of great letters after Rob asked, do you want us to do more Pathfinder stuff? And everyone was like, yes, please. Please do some second edition Pathfinder adventure paths. Please do more Starfinder stuff. And please do more deep dives into setting books and rule books from third-party publishers. So I think that's something Rob and I can do. And thank you to the plethora. We
love reading adventure paths anyway, and I would love to revisit some of them, especially Paizo ones. So consider that something we're going to do because they're really good and there's a lot to learn from them. So thank you for your feedback. I appreciate that.
This one's from Martin. Dear DMs, Matt and Rob, big fan of the show. Truly America's best historical materialist D&D podcast. No, but seriously, I love the show. I've listened to almost all the old episodes. 10 out of 10. We're like Flight of the Conchords is New Zealand's best comedy folk duo. Okay, my question is this. I'm planning to run a campaign, my first, for some friends using the Dungeon Crawl Classic systems, which is known for being a bit deadly. That said, I hope to run a longer-term campaign, but given the deadliness of the system, I'm wondering if you have any tips for dealing with character death and integrating replacement PCs. To be more specific, 1, would you recommend just letting players who lose their characters roll up a new one of the same level, or would you make them a new first-level character, or perhaps something in between? For example, applying a predetermined experience penalty to any new characters. Okay, let's pause here and answer this question, because I think it's got a clear answer for me.
So this is a good question. Generally, I would say I would advise against having anybody roll up a level 1 character when other players are higher level, just anytime. Maybe with Dungeon Crawl Classics, if your players are going in expecting a grinder style, never-ending dungeon murder fest, then that could be fun.
Right. You're awarding experience individually based on like who's there or who's in the room, then yes, that could work.
But I would make sure
I wouldn't go first level, especially by the time the party's 4th or 5th. You gotta say, all right, you're 1 level behind, or something like that.
But overall, I would make sure to get buy-in from your players on that. If you do that, the easiest thing I think is just have them roll up a new character at the same level.
Yeah, if you're using everyone's the same level, the easiest and I think best solution is new characters come in at the same level as the party. You've already been punished enough by losing your character. If you want to make sure you're like, hey, it sucks to die, you've lost all your magic items, right? You've lost all your equipment. You can say same level, but you're at starting equipment levels, right? So, like, it sucks enough to die. I think
I don't know that
level is absolutely fine.
Additional punishment, yeah.
All right, here's question 2. How much effort would you go into creating a story around why this new character, who may be much less powerful than the other PCs, is suddenly hanging around with the adventuring party? In games I've played where characters have died, this has mostly been hand-waved, but these were shorter campaigns, so it seemed less critical for the PCs to be really integrated into the story. I guess what I'm hoping to avoid is a situation where anyone, after losing a character, also loses interest in the overarching story of the campaign and the world it's taking place in. I'd like the players to feel like creating a new character is an opportunity to build out new aspects to the story, but I also worry this could unbalance the party. Thanks for the great show and keep rolling them dice, Martin.
We talked about this a bit last episode, but in general, I would say that they should keep character creation relatively brief or background relatively brief, and create it in such a way that it makes sense for them to slot into an existing party. Without knowing more about your campaign, I can't give you specific advice about how to make it feel like they're a part of the ongoing story. That kind of has to be handled on a case-by-case basis, and it depends. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not.
It's tough. I think your easy go-to is when the players making a new character say, okay, of the factions we've encountered, of the players who are still alive, are there any that you feel like you have a strong connection or interest in? And then say, oh, yeah, the church that's sworn itself to killing these demons, I really like that. And you're like, okay, well, you could be from that. Or I would say let the ball be in the player's court first. Be like, you get to make a new character. And as, kind of a loser's prize, since you lost your character, what's one aspect of the story that you want to bring in, right? What's one, you want to be someone who was once a cultist of the cult the player characters have been following, and we can find you imprisoned in the next dungeon room or something like that. Ask the players, see if they have any ideas, and then and your other player characters are a resource here. You can be like, well, the player says, well, I've always wanted to make a dwarf. Well, you can say, hey, do you want to be the cousin of the dwarf that's already in the party? Perfect. You've just arrived in town.
That's how I've done it in the past, and sometimes it's just going to be a little awkward, but be candid with your players and talk to them about it, and work with them to figure out a way that makes sense. You know, you're not going to be able to just sort of like make it happen without talking to your players and saying, okay, one of you is dead. How do you want to, like, you know, reintegrate into the campaign with a new character?
Here's one thing I did in a campaign not that long ago, I guess 2 years ago, is we had a mini session 0 after 2 player characters had died. And I said, okay, your party is really shorthanded. You're going back into town to hold a job fair. And the players were like really into this, and it allowed me to introduce some new NPCs. But each of the players who died made 2 NPCs. And the rest of not 2 NPCs. They made 2 PCs, and they presented them both to the party in like a job fair like question, and the party got to choose which of their PCs. Everyone was cool with this. They were like, "Yeah, I love rolling up PCs. Let's do this." So there's a fun idea. Have a job fair.
Sorry, I just thought of something. Sorry, I apologize for going off the rails, but the previous question was so good. John Wick. John Wick doesn't make a fucking lick of sense. It has absolutely, like, the world building is just totally bonkers. There's like this huge network of assassins, and they've all got like there's nowhere near enough like people that need to be killed to like justify this like underground economy. Nobody cares. It does not matter. Everyone loves John Wick. It rules. The immersion is great. The rule of cool is 100%.
Those fucking cougarans it's just very cool.
It doesn't, but that doesn't like irritate me the way that Harry Potter does. And like, maybe that's a personal problem, but like, I would use that as a confirmation of how you don't have to worry about consistency, but it also doesn't have to suck. And, you know, doesn't really seem to matter that nothing makes sense in John Wick, but like enough stuff kind of makes sense in Harry Potter that it does feel like it matters that a bunch of things don't.
Again, it's the letter writer is right, and it's why John Wick is like a great movie. The sequels start to drag because you get into more of the insane, inconsistent stuff that doesn't make sense, and you just feel confused, and there's not as like strong of a like what's going on here. Like I had no idea what was going on in John Wick 3. I was excited when Keanu Reeves shot someone with a muzzle loading flintlock pistol and like fought a guy on a horse in a motorcycle.
But like, Halle Berry and her dogs were really cool. I don't remember.
But I was like, I don't remember who Halle Berry was or
remember.
why
I know they
she
were
was
in
there.
Morocco, maybe, but I don't know why. Anyway.
Yeah, so there we go, right? This is the problem with Rule of Cool as you continue playing. And it's fine, though. Your players will still love John Wick campaign.
Anyway, back to Martin. Martin, I hope that's helpful. Thank you for writing. It really depends, but just work with your players, and also hopefully there won't be so many character deaths that this becomes an issue. Though the more you have, the easier it gets. So, you know, maybe the problem will solve itself. But I found that if your players are on board, the verisimilitude, you know, getting them to slot back into the campaign is not that difficult. But you gotta get your players ready for that ahead of time.
I mean, there's a million ways you can find the next player character in the next room of the dungeon or the next town over. But if you're ever don't have a cool plot idea, just tell the party, you know, you're shorthanded. You need to find someone to take this person's place. You go into town and ask around. And that's when you meet the perfect person for the job who just happens to be the new player character.
Okay.
If you want to have your letter read, just like these wonderful letter writers here did, all you have to do is write us at dmofnone@gmail.com.
Add us on Twitter at dmofnone. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/dungeonmasterofnone. Thanks as always, everybody, for writing in. We love your letters. We love your questions. And we will answer more of them, hopefully sooner rather than later. Thanks for listening. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.